The first sign that Sunday dinner was going to be a disaster was the smell. It wasn't the comforting aroma of roasted chicken or the gentle perfume of baked potatoes. Mary Jane watched with a morbid fascination as her mother, Carol, tentatively pulled a scorched baking dish from the oven. The so-called garlic bread was less bread and more a charcoal briquette with a single valiant sprig of parsley clinging to its surface, a final desperate cry for help. Her father, a man whose patience had been tested by 4 decades of Carol's experimental cooking, simply sighed and took a long philosophical sip of his water. "It's rustic," her dad Mark offered weakly, a muscle in his cheek twitching. "It's a metaphor for my dating life, Dad." "A literal train wreck," Mary Jane muttered, spearing a piece of half-raw zucchini with her fork. The twins, Aiden and Ethan, immediately perked up, their eyes glinting with a shared, mischievous glee. It was a look Mary Jane knew well. It meant she was about to become the main event, the subject of their latest sibling rivalry, a spectator sport they'd perfected over 24 years of tormenting her. "What's that? Did someone say, dating life?" Aiden asked, his voice dripping with faux innocence. Aiden was the cynic, the resident family troll who found joy in pointing out the inevitable failure of all things, especially when those things involved his sister and romantic prospects. Oh, Mary Jane's dating life is a beautiful disaster, a tragic opera in 5 acts, complete with dramatic exits and an entire cast of emotional support ice cream tubs. Ethan chimed in, his tone melodramatic. Ethan was the hopeless romantic, the one who believed in grand gestures and fated encounters, even if those encounters were with a guy named Chad, who only ever texted in emojis. Mary Jane pointed her fork at them. "You two shush. I am trying to eat my whatever this is." But it was too late. The stage was set. Her mother cleared her throat, placing a hand on Mary Jane's shoulder. "Sweetie, your father and I have been talking. And we know you've been busy with work and we just want to help." A cold dread settled in Mary Jane's stomach. Her parents' help usually meant something involving a blind date with a guy whose profile photo was clearly taken 15 years ago, or an embarrassing dinner with a family friend's eligible son who spent the entire evening talking about his extensive collection of vintage trading cards. "Help with what exactly?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Her mother pulled out her phone, and with a flourish usually reserved for a magician revealing their final trick, she presented it to her. We made you a Tinder profile," Carol announced, her face beaming with pride. Silence. The kind of silence that's so thick you could carve it with a knife. Mary Jane stared at the phone screen, at the professional-looking headshot her mom must have dug up from a decade-old family photo album. It was a picture of her at her cousin's wedding, smiling awkwardly, holding a bouquet of plastic flowers and looking like she was a hostage. Below it was a bio that read, "Love's long walks on the beach and finding true love. Here for the right reasons. No games." Mary Jane's jaw dropped. You made me a Tinder? Why would you do that?" "It's the new way," Mark declared, pulling out his own phone and swiping through a fake profile they'd made for her. "We've got you on all the apps. Bumble, Hinge, even this new one for people who only date pet lovers. Your profile picture is with Buster." He held up the screen and sure enough there was Mary Jane, kneeling next to their golden retriever Buster, who was giving her a look that clearly said, "Please don't involve me in your human madness." Before Mary Jane could find the words to express her utter humiliation, the twins erupted. "Ha! Told you!" Aiden bellowed, slapping the table. "I knew it was coming. The desperation has officially hit critical mass. I bet this is just another Gary from accounting situation." Ethan glared at him, his face a mask of wounded outrage. "How can you be so cynical, Aiden? This is fate. A modern-day fairy tale. This is the start of her happily ever after." "Oh please. It's the start of a 7-season limited series on Netflix called Mary Jane's Worst Nightmares." Aiden shot back, crossing his arms. Mary Jane looked from one brother to the other, her head spinning. "Wait, what are you two talking about?" Ethan pointed a dramatic finger at Aiden. "We have a running bet, obviously. On how long it'll take you to find a soulmate from one of their schemes. And I always win, Aiden said with a smug grin. Her last fix-up from mom and dad lasted 2 weeks before the guy ghosted her and started a podcast about his emotional healing journey post-Mary Jane. But this is different, Ethan insisted, looking at his parents. This is a whole new level of meddling. This is a new start. I bet that the first person she matches with will be the one. The alpha to her soulmate. The alpha of her pack of emotional support ice cream, more like, Aiden interrupted with a snort. The tension in the room was now palpable, a perfect cocktail of sibling rivalry, parental interference, and Mary Jane's mortification. This wasn't just a dinner anymore. It was a courtroom, and she was the star witness in a trial of her own love life. That's it, Mark suddenly announced, slamming his hand down on the table. The flimsy casserole dish of burnt bread shuddered. We're tired of this. This is the last time we're doing this. But you always say that, Mary Jane said, her voice a little too high. No, this time we mean it, Carol said firmly. This time the bet is officially on and the stakes are real. Aiden and Ethan immediately leaned forward, their sibling rivalry now a full-blown war. Stakes? They asked in unison. If Aiden wins and Mary Jane doesn't find someone from this whole Tinder thing, Mark began, a wicked glint in his eye, Ethan has to spend a month at the cottage with no Wi-Fi, no signal, and only old books to keep him company. Ethan's face went white. A month without the internet was a punishment worse than any physical torture. And if Ethan wins and Mary Jane finds her person, Carol continued, a mischievous smile playing on her lips, Aiden has to dress up as a fairy and act as a greeter at the local farmer's market every Saturday for a month. Aiden let out a strangled gasp. A fairy. With wings. With wings, Carol confirmed, her eyes twinkling. Mary Jane watched the whole thing unfold, her emotions running the full gamut from mortification to a bubbling, unexpected sense of hope. Could she really find someone from this whole mess? Or would she be stuck in the middle of this ridiculous family drama forever? She looked from her parents, who were now giggling like teenagers, to her brothers, who were glaring at each other as if they were about to go to war. This wasn't just a dating profile anymore. It was a battlefield, and she was the unwilling general. And somewhere out there, her first match was just a swipe away, about to unknowingly step into this emotional, hilarious, and completely chaotic family. Chapter 1. The polished mahogany of the boardroom table gleamed under the harsh, white lights, a perfect reflection of the cold, calculated atmosphere in the room. Jace sat at the head of it all, his posture straight, his gaze fixed on the quarterly earnings report displayed on the giant screen before him. At 28, he was the youngest CEO in the history of the Jackson Aurelius Group, a position he'd been groomed for since he was a teenager. He was calm, collected, and respected. His peers and rivals viewed him as a natural leader, a man whose instincts were as sharp in the corporate world as they were in his private, far more complicated life. Around him, senior executives presented their projections. The numbers were solid, the growth was steady, and everything was on track. Jace, however, had a nagging feeling in his gut. It wasn't about the company. It was a deeply personal and, in this sterile environment, deeply embarrassing sensation. Suddenly, a sound cut through the quiet hum of the air conditioning. It wasn't the click of a pen or the turning of a page. It was the ridiculously cheerful, synthesized opening chords of a pop song, a melody so out of place it felt like a violation of the professional sanctity of the room. The sound was coming from his blazer pocket. Jace froze. He felt a hot, mortified flush creep up his neck. He'd forgotten to silence it. He'd forgotten he even had it. His parents, in their endless quest to find him a partner and a stable home life, had insisted on a new phone for his birthday, a device they had apparently set up for him. He reached into his pocket to silence the digital menace, but before he could, the screen lit up with a notification that blared with an intrusive, neon-colored heart. New match. You and Mary Jane are a perfect match. Jace stared at it, his jaw hanging slightly agape. He hadn't downloaded a single dating app. He hadn't been on a date in a year, too busy running a multi-billion-dollar company and dodging his mother's endless stream of just a friendly introduction luncheons. His parents. A feeling of cold, absolute dread settled in his stomach. The only way he could possibly be on this app was if they had. He quickly dismissed the notification, sliding the phone back into his pocket with a speed that defied logic. He looked up, his eyes meeting the stony gaze of his CFO, a man who had worked with Jace's father for decades. The man's eyebrows were raised, his expression a mixture of disbelief and quiet judgment. "Apologies," Jace muttered, his voice a low growl. "A technical issue." The meeting limped on for another half hour, but Jace's mind was a million miles away. All he could think about was the absurdity in his pocket. The moment the meeting ended, he stormed back to his private office, the polished floors and glass walls doing nothing to contain his growing frustration. He pulled out the phone, staring at the little flame icon on the screen. He opened the app. The profile they'd created for him was a crime against humanity. The picture was a professional shot from a business magazine, of him looking serious and imposing in a tailored suit. It made him look less like a potential partner and more like a hostile takeover expert. The bio, however, was a whole new level of cringe. It read, "Dedicated CEO seeks mate for a lifetime of love and shared financial prosperity. I'm a leader, fiercely loyal, and my mother says I have an amazing sense of humor. Looking for a queen to my king." Jace nearly threw the phone across the room. His mother, the CEO of the company's charity foundation, had written that. A woman who commanded rooms of philanthropists with a single glance had reduced his entire life and career to a dating app bio that sounded like it was written by a medieval knight looking for a bride. He scrolled through the few matches he had, a morbid fascination taking hold. He saw a few familiar faces, daughters of business partners, old family friends. He quickly swiped left on all of them. He couldn't face the shame. Then he saw a new face. Mary Jane. Her profile picture was a weird one. She was kneeling next to a golden retriever who looked like he was contemplating the meaning of existence. Her bio, equally cringeworthy, mentioned her love of long walks on the beach and her quest for true love. And just like that, a feeling of shared deep-seated suffering washed over him. He swiped right. A moment later his phone buzzed. It's a match. He stared at the screen, a new kind of panic setting in. He had to unmatch her. This was a nightmare. He was an alpha in the business world, a man of power and authority. He was not on Tinder. But before he could, a message from Mary Jane popped up. It was blunt and to the point. "Hi there. Do you have any idea what's going on?" He felt a wash of shared relief. She was just as confused as he was. His fingers flew across the screen, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over him. He responded, "My parents made me a Tinder." "You." The response was immediate. It was as if she'd been waiting for a sane person to explain this to her. "Same. I literally just found out. I'm pretty sure my mom stole my work headshot and my dad wrote the bio. It's a literal nightmare." He let out a low chuckle, a sound that was foreign in his sterile office. He appreciated that she was so honestly mortified. He wrote back, "My mom says I'm a good catch. It's a quote in my bio." Her next reply popped up on the screen. "Mine says I'm here for the right reasons. Like I'm a contestant on a reality show. So embarrassing." He couldn't help but laugh out loud. The sheer, relatable absurdity of their situation was breaking through his annoyance. He felt a sense of camaraderie with this stranger he'd just met. "My bio also says I'm a leader of my people. This is my life." He waited, half expecting her to unmatch him. Instead, her next message was filled with a dry wit that made him smile. "Leader of your people? Cool. So, are we obligated to get married now? Or just go to dinner so our parents will leave us alone for a week?" Her sarcasm was perfect. He decided to extend a truce, an offer she couldn't refuse. "I think a dinner to appease the meddlers is the safer option. What do you say? A ceasefire in the war of the meddling parents." Her final response sealed the deal. "Agreed. Name a time and place. Let's make this a glorious, awkward train wreck. Our parents owe us." He quickly typed out his final message. a sense of purpose returning to him for the first time that day. Tomorrow. I'll text you the details from a number I just created to avoid any parent-trapping shenanigans. Consider it an alliance. Her final reply appeared on the screen, cementing their new hilarious partnership. An alliance it is, CO Jace. May the odds be ever in our favor. As Jace put the phone down, he felt an unexpected sense of excitement. This wasn't a potential mate but a co-conspirator. A partner in crime against their shared enemy, their overbearing, matchmaking families. He had no idea what this woman was like or what she looked like beyond a fuzzy picture and a golden retriever. All he knew was that she understood. She was a kindred spirit in the face of absolute chaos. He was still horrified, but for the first time since this whole Tinder thing began, he was also genuinely curious about what came next. Chapter 2. Jace picked a restaurant that was so exclusive it didn't even have a sign. He had to know it was there. It was the kind of place where the waiters spoke in hushed tones, the food was arranged like a modern art exhibit, and the price of a single cocktail could pay Mary Jane's grocery bill for a month. He watched as she walked in, her face a mask of polite confusion as she navigated the silent, reverent dining room. She was wearing a simple, comfortable dress, not a designer label in sight. For the first time he saw her not as a pawn in his parents' game, but as an actual living person. She was even more stunning than her awkward photo with Buster. Her hair was a wild mess of curls, her eyes were a sparkling hazel, and there was a subtle hint of amusement playing on her lips, as if she was already in on the joke. As she sat down, the silence was deafening. Jace's mind, which usually ran at 1,000,000 miles an hour, was suddenly blank. The witty banter they'd shared over text felt 1,000,000 miles away, replaced by the crushing weight of real-life face-to-face awkwardness. So, Mary Jane began, breaking the silence. She leaned forward, her voice a low conspiratorial whisper. "This is terrible." A genuine smile touched the corners of his mouth. "You're not wrong." He leaned forward too, joining her in her game. "I'm genuinely not sure which is worse. The fact that our parents did this or that we're both actually here. I think the worst part," she whispered, "is that you picked a restaurant with no menu. I have no idea what to say, and I'm pretty sure that waiter just gave me a look of pure disdain." He chuckled softly. "That's probably because you didn't know that the server's name is actually Jean-Pierre and he's an internationally acclaimed food sommelier. You should have greeted him in French." Her eyes widened in mock horror. "I'm sorry, I forgot my Rosetta Stone. This is a complete and utter disaster. My parents are going to love this." And that was their shared objective. To fail so spectacularly that their parents could never, ever try something like this again. The conversation began, and it was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive, high-stakes one-upping. "So, what do you do for work?" Jace asked, leaning back in his chair, a casual smirk on his face. "Oh, I'm an accountant. I basically live in a spreadsheet. It's not very glamorous," she said with a shrug. The irony was not lost on him that his entire business rested on spreadsheets. "What about you? What's a Jace even do?" "Oh, nothing much. Just, run a company. A global conglomerate. Very boring, really. Lots of meetings." He watched her eyes as he said this, looking for a reaction. Did she find this impressive? Boring? Was she intimidated? Mary Jane just took a sip of water, a perfectly straight face. "Oh, that sounds nice. I ran a half marathon once. Does that count as a conglomerate?" The waiter, Jean-Pierre, placed their food in front of them with a flourish. A single scallop sat on a bed of something green and impossibly small. It looked like something a bird might build a nest out of. Mary Jane pointed at the plate. "Is this all of it?" "I'm sorry, I'm used to a buffet. I brought my own Tupperware and everything." Jace nearly choked on his water. This woman was a genius. She was weaponizing her normalcy in a way that was a pure art form. He decided to double down. "I only eat things that are sustainably sourced from my own private organic farm. It's really a pain. I have to fly out every weekend to make sure the carrots are in order," he said, a casual lie. She just looked at him, her eyes wide with feigned admiration. "Oh, that's so responsible of you. I just buy mine at the grocery store on Tuesdays, to avoid the weekend rush. The date continued in this vein. They argued over the proper way to eat a single scallop with a fork or a single grain of rice, the best mode of transportation, a corporate jet versus a used sedan, and even the weather. Every topic was an opportunity to prove how incompatible they were. They were a perfect disaster and they both knew it. Finally, at the end of the night, standing on the curb as a fleet of black SUVs idled nearby, Jace pulled out his phone. This was a train wreck. As promised, he said, a triumphant smile on his face. Mary Jane nodded, pulling out her own phone. I have to say that was the most entertaining failure I've ever been a part of. We need to report back to our respective parental units. Let's confirm our victory. They both stood there, separated by the sheer expanse of their class differences, both dialing their parents. Jace's phone call was short and to the point. Mom. It was a bust. A complete disaster. We have nothing in common. I have no idea what you were thinking. He could practically hear the disappointment in her voice. Don't worry. The mission was a success. We won our freedom. I'm never doing this again. He hung up, a sense of deep satisfaction spreading through him. He was free. Meanwhile, Mary Jane was speaking in excited, hushed tones. Mom, oh my God, you would not believe this. He's so pretentious. He said he flies to his own private farm to check on his carrots. And he didn't even laugh at any of my jokes. It was horrible. You were so right. Total bust. I can't believe it actually worked. She hung up, a triumphant grin on her face. They both looked at each other, their faces filled with the glorious relief of victory. Suddenly, both of their phones buzzed simultaneously. Jace's phone lit up with a message from his mother. A beautiful train wreck, Jace. I've never seen you so engaged in a conversation with a woman. You're both so passionate. You're going to spend 7 days together at the lake house we just bought. The reservation is made. Don't disappoint us. Mary Jane's phone lit up with a message from her mother. I just got off the phone with Jace's mother. The two of you are going to the lake house. 7 days. It's a sign. You've both found your match. Jace looked at his phone, then at Mary Jane, his face a mask of utter horror. Mary Jane looked at her phone, her mouth agape. Did you just get a message about a lake house? He could only nod, a single shaky gesture. The parents hadn't been watching a disaster. They had been watching a hilariously awkward, combative and fiery interaction. To them it wasn't a disaster at all. It was a spark. He saw her face fall in defeat, the same horror reflected in her eyes that he felt in his own heart. His freedom wasn't a win. It was a punishment. A 7-day sentence with the one woman who could truly make him feel like he was losing his mind. He and Mary Jane stared at each other, their faces drained of color. The disaster had not only failed to set them free, it had sealed their fate. They were now at the mercy of their meddling parents. Chapter 3. The lake house was a masterpiece of modern architecture. All glass walls, clean lines and dark wood, it sat nestled between a stand of weeping willows and a placid lake that looked like something out of a brochure. It was beautiful, serene, and to Jace and Mary Jane, it felt like a maximum security prison. As they both dragged their suitcases out of the town car, a wave of profound misery washed over them. They were alone. Together for 7 full days. Mary Jane unlocked the front door and pushed it open, stepping into a living room that was bigger than her entire apartment. A massive fireplace sat on one wall and a full-size bar on the other. Jace just stood in the doorway, his jaw clenched, looking like he was contemplating a prison break. Wow, she finally said, her voice dry. I feel so punished. Don't worry, Jace muttered, dragging his bag inside. I'm sure they didn't get Wi-Fi here. They probably want us to connect with each other instead. He was right. A quick look around the place and a scan of his phone confirmed it. There was a landline, an old TV and nothing else. Just the two of them, the lake and the ever-present silent judgment of their meddling parents. The first few hours were filled with a kind of passive-aggressive dance. They unpacked in separate rooms without a word, slammed their doors a little too loudly, and tiptoed around each other with the kind of tension you could only find in a horror movie where the monster hasn't appeared yet. The first fight started over the thermostat. "Why is it so hot in here?" Jace asked, dropping a few ice cubes into his water. Mary Jane, who was bundled in a cardigan, just glared at him. "It's freezing. It's practically Arctic in here. I thought you were a human, not a penguin." "My wolf blood runs hot," Jace said with a shrug without even thinking. He froze. His private life, his paranormal side, had just casually spilled out in a normal argument. Mary Jane's eyes widened. She stared at him for a moment, waiting for a punchline. He quickly recovered. I run hot. I just get warm easily." Mary Jane just stared at him, a quizzical look on her face. She was the first human who hadn't immediately asked to see his wolf form. It was a bizarrely refreshing moment of shared awkwardness. "Right," she said slowly. "Well, my human blood runs cold. Turn it up." "I'm cold." He scoffed. "I'm not turning it up. I'll melt." "Then melt," she shot back. "I'll get the mop." The argument was so pointless it was almost funny, a perfect metaphor for their situation. The rest of the day was filled with similar petty squabbles. He would leave an empty milk carton in the fridge and she would stare at it until he put it away. She would take too long in the bathroom and he would bang on the door, pretending he had a medical emergency. They were two children forced to live together, and both of them were determined to make the other's life as miserable as possible. The next morning, as Mary Jane was making coffee, her phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Aiden. "Aiden, how's the enemy? Here's a list of things to really get under his skin. Good luck. #Team Aiden." She opened the message and read through the list. It was a masterpiece of sibling sabotage. The official guide to annoying Jace Aurelius. Leave the cap off the toothpaste. He's a germaphobe. He'll lose his mind. Hum show tunes slightly off-key. He hates musicals. You'll drive him crazy. Use all the hot water for your shower. He'll have to take a cold one. Hide the TV remote. This one is a classic. Change the thermostat settings when he's not looking. This is a must. Mary Jane laughed out loud, a genuine joyful sound. This was exactly the kind of ammunition she needed. She immediately went to the bathroom, unscrewed the toothpaste cap and left it on the counter. The game was officially on. Later that afternoon, a delivery truck rumbled down the dirt road leading to the lake house. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang. Jace opened the door to find a massive, suspiciously cheerful-looking package sitting on the front porch. The box was covered in hearts and glitter and had "For True Love" scrawled across the top. He looked at Mary Jane with a look that said, "What in the world is this?" "Oh God," Mary Jane muttered, her face turning pale. "It's a care package from my brother. Ethan has gone too far this time." He dragged the box inside and tore it open. Inside was a treasure trove of romantic clichés. A box of terrible heart-shaped board games, a pair of ugly, matching, oversized pajamas with little teddy bears on them, a bottle of something labeled Love Potion Number 9, and a set of instructions on how to win his love with a single gaze. Jace picked up a copy of a VHS tape that simply said, "Romantic comedies that will change your life." He put his face in his hands. Mary Jane, who had been watching the whole thing unfold with a mix of horror and morbid curiosity, couldn't hold back her laughter. "Is that a VHS tape?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "Ethan says it's for our bonding experience," he said, his voice muffled by his hands. "I think he's trying to get me to cry." Just as they were both recovering from their shared humiliation, both of their phones rang simultaneously. It was their parents on a conference call. "Hello, sweethearts. How's the lake house?" Carol's voice chirped through the phone. Mark's voice was full of feigned casualness. "Just checking in to make sure everything is going smoothly." Jace and Mary Jane looked at each other. They had to come up with a story. Fast. "Oh, everything's just perfect," Mary Jane said sweetly, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "The place is beautiful," Jace added, his voice strained. We just finished playing a board game." "Oh, that's wonderful," Carol said excitedly. "See, Mark. Mark's voice said, seemingly on the other end of the line. They're having fun. We knew it. Jace and Mary Jane just stared at each other, their faces a mix of annoyance and disbelief. The phone call, which was supposed to be a simple check-in, turned into a 20-minute interrogation about their feelings, their bonding, and whether or not they had discovered the spark their parents were so sure existed. They had no idea that Aiden and Ethan's meddling was happening in real time. When the call finally ended, they both let out a long, frustrated sigh. They were both trapped in this ridiculous bet, and their families were not only aware of it but were actively trying to control the outcome. They were both stuck in this beautiful, isolated hell, and they both had 7 days to get through it. The pettiness was still there, but now it was fueled by a new shared enemy, their families. For the first time they felt like they were on the same side, if only for a moment. But that moment passed quickly. Jace looked down at the love potion and scoffed, picking up the box and tossing it on the fire. It landed with a pathetic thud. "What are you doing?" Mary Jane said, her eyes wide with indignation. "That was my brother's. Your brother sent me a love potion and made me watch a musical he said, a growl in his voice. "He's lucky I didn't throw his entire box in there. What's wrong with you and your family? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with you and your family? You're so entitled and arrogant." And with that, the shared moment of peace was gone, replaced once again by the petty, ridiculous argument that had been the main event of their week. Chapter 4. The next morning, Jace and Mary Jane were locked in a cold war over breakfast. He was reading a corporate memo on his phone, an old PDF he'd downloaded for emergencies, while she was staring at her phone, meticulously crafting a passive-aggressive text to her brother Aiden. Just as she was about to hit send, Jace's phone rang. It was a video call from their parents. Jace sighed and answered. The split screen on the phone showed both sets of parents smiling back at them, an unnerving display of familial glee. "Good morning, you two," Mary Jane's mother chirped. "We're just checking in. How are things?" Jace's mother, never one to beat around the bush, cut to the chase. "We've been talking. A relationship is built on shared experiences. And what could be more intimate than cooking a meal together?" Jace's heart sank. He knew where this was going. Mary Jane's father, Mark, chimed in. "Why don't you try making a pasta dish? Simple, delicious. A perfect activity to bond over." Jace stared at his mother. "Mom, you know I only eat things prepared by a professional chef. I don't cook." His mother just smiled. "Nonsense, darling. It's for a good cause. It's a challenge. Just make sure to send us a picture of the finished product." They ended the call before either of them could argue. Jace and Mary Jane looked at each other, the shared frustration palpable. "They want us to cook," Jace said, his voice a flat monotone. "They want us to bond," Mary Jane corrected, putting extra emphasis on the word. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore. This is a direct order from the Meddling Parent Alliance." Jace looked at her and for the first time all week, saw a flicker of genuine annoyance that matched his own. "Fine. We'll do it. But don't expect it to be edible. I'm going to make sure this is a disaster that will end all future disasters." They walked into the pristine, state-of-the-art kitchen, an alien world to both of them. Jace, used to a personal chef, had no idea where anything was. Mary Jane, used to a tiny apartment kitchen, was overwhelmed by the sheer size of the room. They decided to make a simple tomato sauce and pasta. The disaster began almost immediately. "Okay, where are the measuring cups?" Mary Jane asked, rummaging through a drawer. "Measuring cups?" Jace scoffed. "I just eyeball it. By scent." Mary Jane just stared at him. "You eyeball pasta sauce with your nose?" "Jace, your arrogance has reached a level of pure, concentrated ridiculousness." As she said that, she pulled open a cabinet and a massive bag of all-purpose flour fell out, hitting the floor and exploding in a white cloud. The flour billowed up, covering both of them from head to toe. They were standing in the middle of a literal flour bomb, looking like two frosted-over snowmen. Before either of them could react, the fire alarm, triggered by the cloud of dust, began to blare. The sound was a shrill, piercing shriek that added a new layer of panic to the situation. They scrambled, trying to find a broom or a fire extinguisher, slipping on the flowery floor. Jace tried to reach up and turn off the alarm, but he couldn't get his footing. In the midst of the chaos, Jace slid on a puddle of water and nearly fell. Mary Jane instinctively grabbed his arm to steady him. He looked at her, covered in white dust, a smear of red tomato sauce on her nose, and a single curl of hair sticking straight up from the top of her head. He was a mess too, his expensive shirt now a canvas of white flour and red splatters. And in that moment something shifted. It wasn't about the bet or the parents or their terrible dinner date. It was just two people completely covered in flour, standing in the middle of a blaring fire alarm and a destroyed kitchen. A single, uncontrollable snort escaped Mary Jane. A second later, Jace let out a deep, booming laugh. The sound filled the room, breaking the tension that had held them hostage all week. What are we even doing?" she said, her voice filled with a fit of giggles. "I have no idea," he said, shaking his head. "I have a global company to run and I'm standing here covered in flour with the smoke alarm going off." She looked at the mess around them, at the ruined dinner, at the absurd waste of a beautiful kitchen, and the laughter became infectious. They leaned against the counter, gasping for breath, their bodies shaking with pure, unadulterated hilarity. The fire alarm was still screaming, but they couldn't even hear it anymore. After what felt like an eternity, the fire alarm finally stopped. The silence that followed was a welcome relief. They stood there looking at each other, their faces streaked with flour and laughter. For the first time all week, the tension was gone, replaced by a strange sense of camaraderie. "So what now?" Mary Jane asked, wiping a smudge of flour from her cheek. "I don't think our parents will be getting that picture of us bonding over a beautiful meal." Jace looked at the ruined kitchen, a small, genuine smile on his face. "Now we order pizza. The mess can wait." As they waited for the delivery driver to arrive, they sat on the living room couch, the two of them a perfect disaster in the middle of a perfect, clean house. The conversation that followed wasn't filled with passive-aggressive digs or sarcastic remarks. It was real. They talked about their jobs, their families, and their mutual frustration with their parents' matchmaking schemes. Jace learned that Mary Jane loved her job as an accountant, not just for the numbers, but because of the people she worked with. Mary Jane learned that Jace's job was more than just board meetings. It was about the legacy his family had built, and the pressure he felt to live up to it. For the first time they felt a real connection. Not an electric spark or a fated mate bond, but the kind of connection that comes from shared suffering and the realization that the person you're with is just as human and just as ridiculous as you are. They were an unlikely alliance, a pair of co-conspirators against the world. And as the doorbell finally rang with the arrival of their dinner, they both knew that this was a victory far greater than anything they could have cooked up on their own. Chapter 5. Day 3 of their 7-day sentence had dawned, and with it, a fragile truce had settled over the lake house. The kitchen was still a mess, a silent testament to their shared failure, but the tension that had suffocated them all week was gone. A new feeling had replaced it, a quiet, almost comfortable awkwardness. They had coffee without talking, each of them lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't until a sudden loud splash from the lake interrupted the silence that Jace looked over at Mary Jane. She had a mischievous glint in her eyes. "My parents once tried to set me up with a guy who lived in another country," she began, a small smile playing on her lips. "They sent me on a business trip to Japan, convinced that our fated encounter would be the perfect romantic comedy meet-cute. He was a translator for my company and he had no idea what was going on. It was so bad I faked an illness just to get out of it." Jace looked at her, his eyebrows raised. "Did it work?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "They made me go to a karaoke bar with him. He sang every single Disney song and made me sing with him. My mom called me the next day to ask if I'd found my prince." Jace let out a deep, rolling laugh, a sound that was so genuine it surprised him. Mary Jane looked at him, surprised herself. She hadn't expected him to find her story funny. The laughter felt good. It filled the quiet house with a warmth that was foreign to them. "Okay," he said, wiping a tear from his eye. You win. That's truly horrific. He paused, a challenge in his eyes. But I think I can top it. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk on his face. My parents once hired a spiritual consultant to find my fated mate. Mary Jane gasped. You're kidding me. I wish I was. He was a guy who claimed to be a wolf whisperer. He came to my office, held up a crystal, and told me that my inner wolf was screaming for a mate, and that if I didn't find one, I would be miserable. My father paid him $10,000 for the consultation. He told me I had to find a woman who smelled like destiny. Mary Jane just stared at him, her mouth agape. He said you had to find a woman who, what? Smelled like destiny, Jace repeated, his face a mask of mortification. And he would not let it go. He kept trying to get me to smell every woman at a party my parents threw. It was the most awkward, humiliating experience of my life. Mary Jane let out a snort and then another, until she was clutching her stomach, tears streaming down her face. Smelled like destiny. What does that even mean? I have no idea, he said, laughing now himself. But I can tell you that I smelled about 50 women that night and none of them smelled like destiny. It was a complete disaster. I had to pay him another $10,000 to leave. They both sat in silence for a moment, their laughter subsiding, a comfortable quiet filling the room. They weren't fighting. They weren't bickering. They were simply two people bonded by their shared, humiliating history. The game had shifted. This wasn't a competition. This was a shared, miserable, and strangely hilarious experience. Okay, Mary Jane finally said, wiping a tear from her eye. I think you just won the meddling parents' Olympics. Oh, I don't know, he said, a casualness in his voice that was new. I bet your brother has some good stories. You have no idea, she said, and then, a mischievous look in her eye, she began to tell him the story of how her brother Aiden tried to convince her to date a guy who was literally allergic to dogs. Aiden told me that his dog allergy was a sign that he was a cat person, and that a relationship with him would be the best thing for me because he wouldn't interfere with my love for my dog Buster, my little prince. She sighed. As if a cat person is better than a dog person. But you know Aiden. He's always so pessimistic. He bet me that I'd break up with him within a month. Jace smiled at her. So, your brother is a pessimist and the other one, Ethan, is a romantic? Yeah, she said, nodding. Aiden calls me MJ, as a joke. He's always been so protective of me. She paused for a moment and then continued, but Ethan, he's the one who gave me all the dating advice and he's the one who sent me that ridiculous package yesterday. He calls me his little lovebird. I'm so embarrassed just saying it out loud. He let out a soft chuckle. Well, I guess we're lucky they don't have more siblings. This would be a real competition. They talked for hours. The easy flow of their conversation a stark contrast to the stilted, sarcastic remarks of their first date. They went from talking about their families to their childhoods, their dreams and their fears. They were peeling back the layers of their defenses, showing each other a side of themselves they kept hidden from the world. And in a quiet moment as they both sat on the couch, watching the sun set over the lake, Jace looked at her and smiled. So MJ, he began, his voice soft, you're an accountant, a dog lover, and a woman who has a terrible sense of humor just like me. Mary Jane's head snapped up. She stared at him, her eyes wide with indignation. Her body, which had been relaxed and at ease, suddenly tensed up. Her voice, which had been soft and easy, was now a sharp edge. Don't call me that, she said, her voice a low growl. Jace looked at her, taken aback. What? Don't call me that, she repeated, her voice firmer this time. Only my family gets to call me that. You don't get to. Jace saw her body language, the defensive posture, the way she pulled her arms close to her chest. He immediately regretted his slip-up. He had no idea the nickname was so important to her, that it was a boundary she had set for herself. He was so used to having his boundaries crossed, he hadn't thought that she might have any of her own. He was used to being the alpha, the one in control. But here he was just Jace, a man who had made a mistake. I'm sorry, he said, and he meant it. I didn't know. The air that had been so easy between them suddenly tensed up, the brief moment of peace replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Mary Jane's guard was back up, her defenses firmly in place. They both knew that Jace had stepped over a line, an invisible boundary that she had just drawn for him. He had taken a privilege that he had not earned, and she had made it clear. The night ended in a silent, tense truce. The laughter from earlier was a distant memory. The light from the moon shone on the water, illuminating the lake house in a quiet, lonely glow. They had made so much progress, and with a single word they had regressed back to strangers. The shared suffering was what had brought them together, but their past still had a hold on them, reminding them that they were still just two people in a ridiculous bet. Chapter 6. Day 4 of their 7-day sentence dawned with a thick, awkward silence. The atmosphere was heavy with the unspoken tension from the night before. Jace was carefully making coffee, his movements precise and controlled, and Mary Jane was sitting on the couch, staring out at the lake, her back to him. The invisible boundary she had drawn with 3 simple words, "Don't call me that," felt like a solid brick wall between them. Jace, in his mind, had replayed the moment 1,000 times, cursing himself for the careless word that had shattered their fragile truce. Suddenly, a delivery truck rumbled down the road again. They both looked up, a shared sense of dread replacing their awkwardness. Jace strode to the door and pulled it open, only to find a massive stack of boxes, all wrapped in a hideous, glittery purple paper. The top one had a label on it that read, "For my favorite romantic lead." Jace looked at the boxes, a deep sense of despair washing over him. The sender was clear. Ethan, Mary Jane's relentlessly optimistic twin. This wasn't just a package. This was a theatrical production, and they were the unwilling stars. He dragged the boxes inside, his face a grim mask. Mary Jane looked at the pile and groaned. "Oh no. He's serious about this, isn't he?" "Oh, he's very serious," Jace said, his voice flat. He pointed to a giant flat box. "This one says, for the most romantic couple on earth. For the perfect cozy night," and he tore the paper off, and the box revealed a set of matching pajamas. They were bright red flannel, covered in little white teddy bears holding hearts. Jace picked up his pair and held it up. It was ridiculously large and impossibly soft. He stared at it, a blank expression on his face. Mary Jane let out a shriek of laughter, a high-pitched hysterical sound that filled the room. "Oh my God!" she shrieked, clutching her stomach. "He's lost his mind. We look like a circus act. A circus act that hates each other and is in a bet with my brother." Jace looked at the ridiculous pajamas and then at her, and a small, unwilling chuckle escaped him. "He actually expects us to wear these?" "Oh yeah," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "This is Ethan's endgame. He wants us to be so embarrassed that we have no choice but to fall in love." Jace looked at the pajamas, then at the other packages. A large box was filled with a collection of romantic comedies on DVD, all with titles like Love at First Sight, The Soulmate Switch, and The Mistletoe Kiss. It was a complete and utter cinematic assault on their senses. "Let's just put these on," Jace said, surprising even himself. "I want to see what he does next. This is no longer a romance. It's a war of attrition, and I refuse to lose." Mary Jane's eyes widened. You're serious? You want to wear those?" "Someone has to prove to him that his meddling is a complete failure," Jace said, picking up his pajamas. "And I think the best way to do that is to give him exactly what he wants and then crush his dreams later." They both went to their separate rooms and changed. When Mary Jane walked out, she was wearing the ridiculous, oversized pajamas, a pair of heart-shaped sunglasses that had also been in the box, and a determined look on her face. She looked at Jace, who was standing in the living room wearing his own matching pair, and a fresh wave of giggles washed over her. "He also included a bag of popcorn," she said, holding it up. "And he said, for the perfect date night to find your soulmate in the stars." Jace rolled his eyes, but a faint smile played on his lips. "Just turn on the movie." They sat on opposite ends of the couch, watching the ridiculous romantic comedy unfold on the screen. The plot was predictable. Two people who hated each other were forced to live together, and by the end they were madly in love. It was so on the nose that it was almost painful. They both started making snide remarks about the plot and the characters and the overly dramatic music. "Oh, look, a montage," Jay said, his voice a low growl. "He's going to run through the city in the rain to get to her. He's not going to make it. She's going to be gone." "Oh, come on," Mary Jane said. "He's a man. He's probably going to stop for a cup of coffee and a donut. He's going to get there too late. She's going to find a new guy." Their snarky commentary became the main event. They were no longer watching the movie, they were critiquing it, and in doing so they were becoming a team. The awkwardness from the night before was gone, replaced by a new, playful dynamic. They were no longer just two people in a bet. They were two people who had a shared sense of humor and a deep mutual dislike for bad cinema. As the movie ended with a dramatic kiss in the rain, they both broke out in laughter again. "I have no idea what that was," Mary Jane said, taking off her heart-shaped sunglasses. "That was a crime against humanity," Jace said. "And I'm glad I got to watch it with you." He immediately corrected himself. I'm glad I got to watch it with a co-conspirator who also hates sappy movies." Mary Jane just smiled. She knew what he meant. The boundary was still there, but for the first time it didn't feel like a wall. It felt more like a line they were both aware of, a gentle reminder that they were still navigating this complicated, hilarious, and ridiculous situation together. The pajamas were still ridiculous, the movies were still awful, but they were no longer just a bet. They were a team. Chapter 7. The apathetic calm of their first few days had cracked and shattered, giving way to something new entirely. It was day 5 of their 7-day sentence, and Jace found himself not dreading the morning but anticipating it. The rigid tension from earlier in the week was gone, replaced by an easygoing rapport. They made breakfast together, the silence broken by the gentle sizzle of bacon and the occasional comfortable hum of a song Mary Jane had stuck in her head. Jace, for his part, found himself not wanting to pull out his phone or check old work memos. He was content to just exist in the same space as her. As they ate, the mood shifted. It was an unspoken collective realization that the end of their forced stay was approaching. What would happen when they returned to their normal lives? Would they just go their separate ways? The laughter from the night before seemed to fade, replaced by a quiet, lingering question. "Do you ever feel like you're just a project?" Mary Jane asked, her voice low. "Like your entire existence is a series of schemes designed to be a fixer-upper for your parents?" Jace put down his fork, a serious look on his face. "All the time. My parents have been trying to fix me since I was a teenager. It's always been about making me better, faster, stronger. A more perfect leader. Better CEO. A more suitable partner." He shook his head, a wry smile on his face. "I'm a paranormal being, and yet my parents are the ones who feel the most out of this world." Mary Jane just stared at him. She didn't know the full extent of his paranormal nature, but she understood the feeling of being a project. She leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They don't get it, do they? They think that a little meddling is just an innocent way to help us, but what they don't realize is that it's exhausting. It's like they're telling us that we aren't good enough the way we are." Jace nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "Exactly. It's like every time they try to set me up, they're telling me that my other half, my wild and untamed side, is a flaw that needs to be fixed. They think I'm incomplete, that I need someone to be a calming presence to my inner beast." He watched her reaction. He was a werewolf, yes, but he was also a man who was emotionally scarred by his parents' overbearing nature. He was telling her his truth in a way that he knew she would understand. Mary Jane nodded slowly, a new look of understanding in her eyes. "And it's the same with me. Every time my mom tried to set me up with a new guy, she's telling me that my life isn't complete without a man. That my job as an accountant, my love for my dog, and my close-knit friendships aren't enough. She's telling me I need to be a better version of myself to be loved." They fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from deep understanding. They weren't just two people in a ridiculous bet anymore. They were two people with deep-seated emotional wounds, wounds that had been inflicted by the very people who loved them the most. They had both spent their lives trying to escape from a suffocating sense of inadequacy, a feeling that no matter what they did, it would never be enough for their families. Jace looked at her, and in that moment he saw her not as a pawn in his parents' game, but as a wounded warrior. He saw her struggles, her frustrations, and her pain. And for the first time he felt something for her that went beyond friendship or a shared sense of humor. He felt a deep empathy. His wolf, which had been quiet for days, suddenly stirred, a deep, silent growl in his chest. His instincts, which had been so focused on his family's company, were now completely and utterly focused on her. His wolf wanted to comfort her, to protect her, to make sure she never had to feel that pain again. Mary Jane, for her part, looked at him and saw him not as a wealthy, arrogant CEO, but as a man who was just as lost and confused as she was. His words, his story, had resonated with her in a way that no one else's had. She realized that his arrogance wasn't arrogance at all, but a defense mechanism, a way to protect himself from the very people who were supposed to love him unconditionally. They talked for hours, the easy flow of their conversation a stark contrast to the stilted, sarcastic remarks of their first date. They went from talking about their families to their childhoods, their dreams, and their fears. They were peeling back the layers of their defenses, showing each other a side of themselves they kept hidden from the world. And in a quiet moment as they both sat on the couch, the sun setting over the lake, Jace looked at her and reached for her hand. His voice was soft, his eyes filled with a new, quiet sense of admiration. "I'm sorry you had to go through that. You deserve to be loved and accepted for exactly who you are." Mary Jane's heart fluttered. She felt a warmth spread through her, a comfort that was a stark contrast to the cold she had felt for her entire life. She squeezed his hand gently, a silent acknowledgement of his words. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a gesture of profound respect and understanding. The night ended on a quiet, intimate note. The laughter from earlier was a distant memory. The light from the moon shone on the water, illuminating the lake house in a quiet, lonely glow. They had made so much progress, and they both knew that this was a turning point. The shared suffering had brought them together, and in doing so, it had created something real, something that they both knew was growing beyond a simple bet. Chapter 8. Day 6 of their 7-day sentence. The sun was setting over the lake, painting the sky in a fiery blaze of orange and purple. A peaceful, comfortable silence had settled over the house, a stark contrast to the chaos of the past few days. Jace and Mary Jane were sitting on the dock, their feet dangling over the cool water. The air between them was filled with a quiet, easy intimacy that had developed since their serious conversation the night before. It seems they've both found a connection, a shared sense of understanding that went deeper than anything they had ever experienced. Mary Jane's phone, which she had mostly ignored all week, buzzed with an incoming text. She picked it up, expecting a message from her mother. But the message that appeared on the screen was from her brother, Aiden. The text was a masterpiece of sibling sabotage, a cruel and clever attempt to turn her against the very person she was just starting to open up to. "Aiden, watch out for Alpha Jace, MJ. He's only playing nice because he knows I'm watching. He's a ruthless CEO who only cares about winning. Don't let his charm fool you." Mary Jane stared at the text, her heart sinking. Aiden's words were a cold, cynical reminder of the bet, of the game that they were still a part of. She felt a wave of anger wash over her. It wasn't just about the bet anymore. This was a direct attack on her newfound connection with Jace. She took a deep breath and looked at him, her face a mask of hurt and frustration. Jace, who was watching her, noticed the sudden change in her demeanor. He immediately sensed that something was wrong. His wolf, which had been at peace for days, suddenly stirred, a low growl in his chest. His instincts, which had been so calm and controlled, were now completely and utterly focused on her. He wanted to comfort her, to protect her, to make sure she was okay. "What is it?" he asked, his voice soft. "What's wrong?" Mary Jane looked at him, her eyes filled with a new, quiet sense of trust. She didn't hide the text from him. She simply turned her phone around and showed him the message. He read it and a look of pure, unadulterated fury crossed his face. His wolf, which had been a low growl, was now a deep, guttural rumble in his chest. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "He's trying to sabotage us," Jace said, his voice strained. "He's worried about losing the bet," Mary Jane said, her voice filled with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "He can't stand the thought that we might actually be happy." Jace looked at her, his eyes filled with a new, quiet sense of admiration. Her heart fluttered. She felt a warmth spread through her, a comfort that was a stark contrast to the cold she had felt for her entire life. She squeezed his hand gently, a silent acknowledgement of his words. This wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a gesture of profound respect and understanding. They sat on the dock for what felt like hours, the moon now high in the sky, illuminating the lake in a quiet, silvery glow. They talked about nothing and everything, a deep, silent communication passing between them. The failed sabotage had not only brought them closer, it had solidified their alliance. They had both been pawns in a game, but now they were players. Jace squeezed her hand gently, his thumb tracing a small circle on her skin. "We won," he said, his voice a low, confident rumble. "It's a game of chess and they just put their queen in check. They think they've won, but they've just given us the perfect opportunity to make our move." Mary Jane smiled, a deep, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. She looked at him, and for the first time she wasn't just seeing Jace, the arrogant CEO. She was seeing Jace, the man. And he was just as terrified and just as excited as she was. "We've got one more night," she said, her voice a whisper. "What do we do now?" He looked at her, and his eyes, which had been so cold and distant in the beginning, were now warm and filled with a deep, new emotion. "We live in the moment," he said, his voice soft. "For one night we just let go." Chapter 9. Day 7. The final morning of their 7-day sentence. The air was heavy with the unspoken weight of it all. They moved with a quiet efficiency, packing their bags in separate rooms, the low hum of their movements a constant, gentle reminder that their time together was coming to an end. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was a comfortable, melancholic hum. They had a final, quiet breakfast, the easy rapport they'd built over the last 2 days feeling as natural as breathing. The petty arguments and sarcastic jabs were a distant memory, replaced by a quiet, deep understanding. As the afternoon light began to soften, painting the lake in hues of soft gold, Mary Jane looked at Jace, a flicker of something she couldn't name in her eyes. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice a low whisper. Jace, who was staring out at the water, turned to her. He had been asking himself the same question all day. What happens when this ends? Do they just go back to their separate, meddled-with lives? The thought was strangely painful. His wolf, which had been so calm and at peace in her presence, felt a low, mournful rumble at the thought of leaving her. I don't know," he admitted, his voice soft. He looked at her, at the small wrinkle of worry between her eyebrows. "We have one more night. We should make it count. What do you say to a bonfire?" Mary Jane's face lit up. It was a simple suggestion, but it felt monumental. It was an acknowledgement that they weren't ready to let go. They spent the next hour gathering wood, their hands brushing against each other as they worked, a new, gentle tension building between them. The fire, once lit, crackled and popped, sending sparks flying into the cool night air. The warmth on their faces was a welcome relief from the cool breeze coming off the lake. They sat on 2 old, worn Adirondack chairs, watching the flames dance. The conversation that night was different. It wasn't about their parents' embarrassing schemes or their shared love for mocking bad movies. It was about them. "Remember the wolf whisperer?" Mary Jane asked, a small smile on her face. "He said you needed to find a woman who smelled like destiny. You know, if I had to guess, I'd say I smell like a mix of pizza, flour, and a desperate need for a vacation." Jace chuckled, the sound deep and warm. "I don't know. I'd say you smell like home. Like a quiet, peaceful kind of calm. And a little bit like coffee." He paused, and his voice dropped to a low whisper. "I like it." Mary Jane's heart fluttered. She felt a warmth spread through her, a comfort that was a stark contrast to the cold she had felt for her entire life. It was a simple compliment, but it felt more intimate and honest than anything anyone had ever said to her. He wasn't just talking about her physical scent. He was talking about her emotional presence, about the way she made him feel. They fell into a comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the gentle lapping of the waves on the shore. The stars began to appear in the night sky, a brilliant, breathtaking tapestry of light. Mary Jane felt a wave of sadness wash over her. This was the last time they would be here together. The last time they would be this close in this beautiful, isolated place. Jace, as if reading her mind, broke the silence. "I don't want to go back," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to go back to the boardroom meetings and the endless calls from my parents, and the feeling that my life is just a series of responsibilities. I don't want to go back to being that man." Mary Jane's heart ached for him. She knew exactly what he was talking about. He felt the same way. She didn't want to go back to her tiny apartment, to the spreadsheets and the endless texts from her family about her love life. She didn't want to go back to being just MJ, a project for her family to work on. She wanted to stay here in this beautiful, isolated place with him. "I don't want to go back either," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I'm tired of feeling like I'm not enough. I'm tired of trying to be a better version of myself. I just want to be me. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can be me here." Jace turned to her, and his eyes, which had been so cold and distant in the beginning, were now warm and filled with a deep, new emotion. He reached out and gently took her hand, his thumb tracing a small circle on her skin. "You are enough," he said, his voice a low, confident rumble. "You're more than enough. You're everything they're not. You're real. You're honest. You're funny. You're everything I didn't even know I was looking for." Mary Jane's heart pounded in her chest. The air was thick with unspoken feelings, with a tension that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She looked at him, at the way the firelight danced in his eyes, at the quiet, vulnerable look on his face. He wasn't just the arroganto anymore. He was Jace. And she was Mary Jane. And they were just two people sitting by a fire, the world a million miles away. He slowly leaned in, his gaze fixed on her lips, and she knew in her heart that this was it. This was the moment that would change everything. Their first real passionate kiss. It wasn't a rushed, desperate act. It was a slow, deliberate, and perfect moment. His lips were soft, and a low, possessive hum rumbled in his chest, a sound she didn't fully understand but that resonated deep within her. It was a kiss that wasn't just about passion but about a deep, profound connection. A kiss that sealed their alliance, their truce, their unspoken feelings for each other. It was a kiss that said, "I found you." As they broke apart, their foreheads resting against each other, they both knew that they couldn't go back to their separate lives. The bet was over. But their story had just begun. "Don't go home," Jace whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Stay with me. Let's face them together." Mary Jane's eyes welled up with tears. The thought of staying here with him filled her with a sense of peace and belonging that she had never felt before. She looked at him, and she knew in her heart that this was the right thing to do. This was her happily ever after. "Okay," she whispered, and her voice was filled with a sense of relief. "I'm not going home. I'm staying with you." The night ended on a quiet, intimate note. The laughter from earlier was a distant memory. The light from the moon shone on the water, illuminating the lake house in a quiet, lonely glow. They had made so much progress, and they both knew that this was a turning point. The shared suffering had brought them together, and in doing so, it had created something real. Chapter 10. Day 8. The first morning of their new life. Mary Jane woke up slowly, a soft, golden light filtering through the large glass windows of the lake house. She was warm, impossibly warm, and comfortable in a way she had never been before. She was nestled against a broad, solid chest, a strong arm draped over her waist. The soft, rhythmic sound of a heartbeat, a deep, contented hum, was a gentle lullaby in her ear. She was in Jace's bed, in his arms, and a deep, quiet sense of peace settled over her. She lifted her head slightly to look at him. His face, which had been so cold and distant on their first date, was now soft and relaxed in sleep. He looked less like an arrogant Zhou and more like a man who had finally found home. The morning was filled with a quiet, peaceful kind of joy. The air, which had once been thick with tension, was now filled with the gentle, rhythmic sounds of domesticity. Just as she was about to move, his eyes slowly opened and a soft, genuine smile touched his lips. "Good morning," he whispered, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Good morning," she whispered back, her heart fluttering. She felt a profound sense of rightness, of belonging. She was in his arms, in a house that was no longer a prison, and their family's bet felt a million miles away. He squeezed her gently and a low, contented hum in his chest vibrated against her. "This feels right," he said, his voice a low, confident rumble. She smiled, her own heart filled with a sense of peace. "It is right." Suddenly, the peaceful morning was shattered by the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway outside. A few moments later, a symphony of car doors slamming echoed through the still air, followed by a chorus of familiar voices. Mary Jane's eyes widened in alarm. "Oh no." Jace's eyes widened too. He knew those voices. His family. His parents. They had come to get their answer in person. He squeezed her hand, a silent promise that he was not going anywhere. The front door, which they had left unlocked, burst open. In walked both sets of parents. They were followed by Aiden and Ethan, the two of them looking like they were in the middle of a private, heated argument. The moment they stepped inside and saw Jace and Mary Jane standing together, holding hands in the kitchen, their eyes widened in unison. The sight was a perfect picture of domestic bliss, a stark contrast to the chaotic, tumultuous scene they had just witnessed on their first date. Mary Jane's mother, Carol, was the first to speak. Her face, which had been filled with worry, was now filled with a triumphant, self-satisfied grin. "Well, look at this. We were so worried you two had run away from each other, but it looks like you've just run away from us instead." Jace's mother, who was standing beside her, nodded, a proud, knowing look on her face. "Bye, sweethearts. We were so worried. We haven't heard from you. We were so worried you weren't going to get together." The room was filled with a chorus of relief and knowing laughter. It was a beautiful, comedic disaster. The parents looked at them, a triumphant look in their eyes. The bet had paid off. Ethan, the romantic, couldn't contain his excitement. He immediately started jumping up and down, a giant, ridiculous grin on his face. "I told you. I told you. I knew it. This is it. My bet. I won. I told you, Aiden, I told you." Aiden, the pessimist, just stood there, his face a grim mask of defeat. He looked at Mary Jane and Jace, his eyes narrowed as if he was trying to find a loophole, a reason to still win. But there was none. The evidence was irrefutable. They were happy. "Fine," he muttered, his voice a low growl. "You win, Ethan. The fairy costume is yours. Just don't expect me to be happy about it." The room erupted in a new wave of laughter. The bet was officially settled, and it was settled in the most public and embarrassing way possible. Their parents' matchmaking scheme had finally paid off. Mary Jane looked at her twin brothers and she knew that this was a moment they would never, ever forget. She looked at Jace and he looked back at her, a silent, comfortable understanding passing between them. They had a shared history now. A shared secret. They had faced a dragon and won. The rest of the morning was filled with a chaotic symphony of teasing, laughter, and a surprising amount of love. The parents, who had once been meddling forces of nature, were now just proud, happy parents, who had found a new, hilarious way to get their children together. The families, which had once been a source of anxiety and frustration, were now a source of comfort and joy. They were no longer two people in a bet. They were a couple and they were ready to face their new life together. As the families all headed out for a celebratory brunch, Jace and Mary Jane didn't stay behind. Instead, they walked hand in hand toward the cars, a quiet, joyful confidence in their steps. They were a united front and they weren't afraid to show it. The brunch was a loud, chaotic, and beautiful reflection of both their families. A chorus of laughter and cheers filled the restaurant. Jace and Mary Jane just sat there, their hands clasped under the table, smiling. The bet was over, but their story had just begun. Epilogue. A few months later, the sun was shining, a gentle breeze was blowing, and the smell of freshly cut grass filled the air. It was a perfect day for a wedding, and as Mary Jane stood at the altar looking at Jace, she felt a quiet, profound sense of peace. The ceremony was filled with laughter and love, a perfect reflection of their hilarious, chaotic journey. As the minister asked if anyone had any objections, Jace's mother leaned over and whispered to Mary Jane's mom, "I bet you $10,000 they have a baby within a year." Mary Jane's mom just smiled. "You're on. But my money's on twins." And from the front row, a new bet was already in the works. Ethan, a triumphant grin on his face, leaned over to Aiden, who was sitting beside him, his arms crossed over his chest, a deep scowl on his face. "I bet you $1,000 they'll have a boy and a girl. Twins. And they'll be just like us." Aiden looked at his twin brother and then at the couple standing at the altar. They were holding hands, their faces filled with a love that was so real, it was almost palpable. He just sighed. "You're on, you idiot." The ceremony continued, and as the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jace looked at Mary Jane, and in his eyes she saw a love so deep that it took her breath away. He wasn't just a rich Sue anymore. He was her husband. And she wasn't just a girl who was tired of being a project. She was his wife. The reception was a blur of family, friends, and a lot of laughter. The parents were already planning their honeymoon and their next family vacation. The brothers, Aiden and Ethan, were still making bets, but now they were about their future. As the night came to a close, Jace and Mary Jane slipped away from the party. They stood together under the stars, just like they had on their last night at the lake house. He wrapped his arms around her and she rested her head on his chest, a comfortable, quiet peace settling over them. Jace looked down at her, and his eyes, which had been so cold and distant in the beginning, were now warm and filled with a deep, new emotion. "I have a feeling our parents are going to be a lot to handle," he said, a small, knowing smile on his face. She just laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that filled the quiet night. "I think we can handle them." Thank you for watching to the end. What a journey. From a hilarious matchmaking scheme to a bet that changed their lives forever, Mary Jane and Jace found love in the most unexpected way. But their story doesn't end here. We want to hear from you. What's the craziest matchmaking story your family has ever tried to pull? Do you have a sibling who's a hopeless romantic like Ethan, or a hilarious pessimist like Aiden? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more werewolf romance fantasy videos. Thanks for watching.